So, Eric, welcome. You are an author, you're a coach. So, your journey into leadership development spans over 15 years and it includes founding MPWR Coaching. What pivotal moment or experience inspired you to take that leap and start your own coaching business and bring you to where you are today?
That's a great question. I'll try to, you know, condense it a little bit, and you can, go a little bit deeper if you'd like in any of these areas. But like most people in my early 20s, starting into the workforce and trying to figure out what does it mean for me to be a leader. And I had very quickly become enamored with reading as many books as I could. And this is back before podcasts. And so just consuming as much content on what good leadership is and how to not only digest it, but how to apply that in my own roles and responsibilities. And if, quite honestly, at that early age, constantly was running up against points of frustration, people giving me feedback that I didn't like, not having the kind of impact that I was wanting to have. And that created an internal frustration for me. And so I went on a lengthy journey of exploring and trying to figure out, like, how do I become the best version of a leader that I can become? And I ended up meeting a mentor who took me under his wing, and I ended up working with him for the better part of about 13 years. And what he was doing was I had no thought about the world of coaching. I thought I might want to go into law. I thought there's a variety of career paths that I thought about.
Sure.
But spending that much time under this mentor, he was actually building a coaching business. And so I just participated in it, not because I had any interest in building a coaching business, but because I wanted to learn from him. The qualities that he carried were the kind of qualities that I thought I want to have those qualities. So I knew at a young age, if I could just spend enough time around this individual, I would probably pick up some of those, if by nothing else than by osmosis. And that did work. But through that process, fell in love with the work of coaching and partnering with people and helping them develop themselves and their teams and their organizations. And then that journey lasted a lot longer than I thought it would. That coaching business was very successful. And then there came a point where I realized, there's a kind of a specialized nuance of coaching that I found most interest, that I felt most passionate about, that I felt I was best suited for. And that is, what we call today the area of emotional intelligence, helping
Mhm.
leaders practice the disciplines of self-awareness and self-leadership. Because I realized over those years of training for myself and for the leaders I was working with that, we all want to be better leaders to influence and impact the people, the
Sure.
organization, the world around us, but learned early on that that journey really begins with ourselves. Our
Yeah.
ability to lead ourselves effectively is what translates into being able to lead others more effectively. And so starting, my own coaching business was my desire, my expressed desire to create a coaching business, a process, a toolkit that would best serve leaders in this area, but also uniquely to bridge the gap between the world of academia and theory and
Mhm.
ideas and principles that we accumulate from books and other forms of content, and to ask the question, how do we empower people to actually do these things on a daily basis in the midst of all of the fires and the hustle and bustle
Sure.
of their work life?
Sure, makes sense. What I love about your story and to pull out is that who you surround yourself with matters. So
Mhm.
you were with a mentor for 13 years. You said it was 13 years or not 13 years, but you said it was longer than what you thought. But what did you come to realize? Was it as long as you thought or was it long in a good way?
I would say we had committed to 3 years. His
Ah,
deal with me was, hey, if you we are from the West Coast, so if you move your family to the East Coast and give me 3 years to help me build this business, then I'll teach you everything I know, and then at that point you can go do whatever you want to do. And because that business grew so rapidly, the team grew rapidly, I found myself playing a significant role within that organization. And so we found ourselves, year after year, just staying one more year.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'll tell you what, though, there was so many positives about that. And one of them was uniquely that this mentor, who in my mind is an innovative genius, but there came a point where he actually blew the business up.
Wow.
And it was such a sad and painful part of the journey, and yet I
D
also know this, that we learn as much from watching people make mistakes and fail
Yeah.
and succumb to their own weaknesses and
Yeah.
blind spots. And so those even though that was a painful season, it was also incredibly educational.
Oh, okay. So when you say blow up, usually I go to the positive, that something went in the positive direction.
Right.
Sounds like it did not go in the positive direction. It went the other way. Can you share a little bit of that story? Like what actually brought what actually blew it up? Um,
Yeah, and again, I'm giving my interpretation. There are
sure.
people who
I
will
mean,
listen
we
to this podcast who know me, who know my story, and who will be able to kind of put the pieces
oh, well,
together.
then, you share what you wanna share,
Yeah,
but I think there's always lessons
yeah,
in what we characterize as failures, and this is something too, we hear failure a lot. It's like, "Oh, I failed at this, I failed at that," and unless we're in the right frame of mind, failure is actually a good thing.
that's
If
right.
you take it and you learn from it, we're either learning or winning, and learners are winners. That's kind of what I repeat to myself. I used to be a
Love it.
big, oh my God, I failed, oh, I don't want to try that because I'm going to fail. And I've gone through a lot of personal coaching, personal development myself to put that word failure to rest and
Yes,
realize, wait a minute, I'm going to make mistakes, and it's in the learning from the mistake, moving on, and then just not repeating it
yeah,
again. So that's why I ask. It's always interesting to find out what brings things down because we can learn from that. So if there's something you want to share from that, that's fine. If you want to bounce in
yeah.
another direction, that's okay too.
No, that's great. I'm happy to share. I love that what you're the idea of what you're sharing. I often communicate it through this analogy of, when our children are learning to walk, they stumble and fumble and fall over and over and over again. And as parents, if we're right there ready to smack them over the head and say, "Gosh, you failed again. You failed again. How do you not
Yeah.
get this? You're never going to walk." But I think we forget that as human beings, that's how we learn and grow and develop for the entirety of our lives. We stumble and fumble and bumble our way into growth and into development. And I think the more that we can accept that, I think we graduate from college, high school, or our graduate studies, and we get a career and we think, okay, now it's my time to succeed. And if
Right.
we
And
forget that
succeed
failure,
doesn't yeah, and succeed doesn't include failure. I think you and I are pretty much kind of the same age, and we grew up in that time where you didn't talk about failures, and failure wasn't an option. I mean, even still today, I kind of tell myself that
yeah,
sometimes, failure is not an option, where that's just so not true. And you have to go through this deprogramming and understand that failure is a normal process in life. And I love that you put it back to the walking analogy, because technically, when you start learning to walk and you fall down, you failed. And if you don't get back up, you'd never learned how to walk. So,
some of my favorite people today often say, these are folks I listen to for my own sense of inspiration and development, but they often just say, "Hey, whenever you're going to grow and develop in any new area, you're going to suck at it, and you got to be okay at that. Like we have to embrace that growth requires a journey through difficulty, through challenge, through failure, through shortcomings, exposing our inadequacy." So that's a perfect
yeah.
segue into what happened with this former mentor of mine. Is he was incredibly capable, competent, and he had helped us or led our business to grow significantly in a very short period of time. And yet, because he's a human being, he had his own blind spots, his own
Mhm.
areas of weakness, inadequacy, and it was his unwillingness to contend with those blind spots, his
Uh,
unwillingness to allow anybody around him into those areas. And so what I find with all leaders is we get to a place where our competence has outraced our character, right?
mm,
The quality of person we are internally. That's for everybody in different stages of our life. And if we're not able to recognize that gap and to do the hard internal work in any given season to grow our character, then what happens is our lack of character ultimately undermines our competency. So we can be very skilled, good. I mean, we work with leaders all the time who have built very successful businesses, making lots of money, and yet there come these moments where their deficiency of character begins to undermine their ability to lead their team, to potentially how they're engaging their family, their own personal health and finances. And so a lot of what we do is help leaders identify that gap and say, hey, first of all, that doesn't mean you're inadequate as a human being. It doesn't mean that you're bad. This is a part of human development. Are you willing to recognize that gap? Are you willing to do the work? of developing your character or capacity or whatever, so that your character can sustain the next levels or seasons of growth.
Oh, that makes sense. I love how you put it that, there's that gap between the competence and the character, but that it's normal.
Yes.
Now, I have an interesting question though. If somebody, or what are your thoughts on somebody's walking into a general manager position, but someday want to aspire to be COO or
Yeah.
CEO or go buy my own company, buy my own business or whatnot? Is there a way to start the process now to kind of shrink the gap as you continue to grow to walk into that position, as opposed to just waking up one day and go, holy holy smack,
Yeah.
I've got this gap that I didn't think was going to happen, which happens to some entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
especially, if they just like walk into it, they buy a business and then the business goes big fast, then of course there's that gap in between. So I'll let you
Yeah.
take that where you want to, how you want to answer that.
Yeah. That's a great question. I would say for all of us at whatever stage we are in our professional development or career path, because for us as humans to grow, to develop, to find greater levels of success is going to require that we are regularly face to face with that gap, because that gap gets exposed
Mm,
when the responsibility or the pressure of what we're trying to achieve reveals some
mm,
deficiency inside of us. Now, the higher level leaders, because of what they've achieved, because of their role, oftentimes start to suffer from a significant degree of insecurity and fear that if anybody finds out that I don't have what it takes to solve this problem, to lead our company to the next level, then I'm going to be disqualified in somebody's eyes or in some way from what I'm trying to achieve. Rather than flipping that script and saying, okay, actually this next level of success is going to require growth, so I can embrace whatever gaps are revealed
mm.
and then do the hard work to grow myself so that I can rise to the occasion. But that's true of anybody at any level. If we're just entering the workforce, if we have any aspiration to take on higher roles and responsibilities, if we could learn the simple tools, if we could learn the simple practices that help us identify those moments where we're being stretched beyond our capacity, and to recognize this isn't bad, this isn't revealing some
Yeah.
negative quality in me, this is actually revealing an opportunity that if I knew how to engage that opportunity and to go through the process of personal growth and transformation, then I can ensure whenever those gaps reveal themselves, I'm equipped to engage them, to achieve that growth and development so that I can continue to rise to the next level. And it's only the leaders who get to the place where they've kind of decided internally, I don't have to grow anymore. I shouldn't have to develop. I should know how to do this. All these shoulds and oughts that kind of rattle around in our brains that actually rob us of the opportunity that's in front of us.
Yeah, I hear the common theme of self-awareness and then self-improvement. So continuous self-improvement seems to be a core value for you, or what you believe in and what you see leaders as they embody that they can grow. What are some of the practices or habits that you found particularly beneficial in either your own journey of personal growth and development, or what you would recommend for leaders?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of ways to take this. I'll kind of break it down to the fundamental or
Sure.
foundational place where we start with leaders is our ability to practice self-awareness. We can't change what we can't see. And our
Mhm.
ability to see ourselves accurately and soberly is not an easy task, because we have blind spots, because we don't like looking at the less nice bits about ourselves, right? We don't want to contend with our own inadequacies or dysfunctions. And so I think we're reluctant to really take a hard look at ourselves. So I think first is practicing self-awareness. And what we train leaders in is kind of simple disciplines of how do you practice honesty? And we use things like journaling, and we have some different tools that we give leaders that empower them to practice honesty. One of those tools is what we call getting game tape, or what is more popularly known as feedback. right? How often do we proactively ask the people around us to give us feedback on how we're operating and how we're impacting our environment, and
Yeah.
where are we an asset, where are we a potential liability? But like I tell people, professional athletes watch game tape. They review a game that they've played in over and over and over. Why? Because they need that outside objective perspective to help them pick up on, hey, where am I performing really well? Where am I struggling? And then what needs to change? If we don't see that and the gap between what we're doing well and not doing well, then we won't be able to seize the opportunity for growth and development. And so we will plateau. We will hit a particular threshold that we can't. And that's incredibly frustrating for leaders. So things like journaling, getting game tape or feedback from others, and then quite frankly, the tools that we've created or developed in our toolkit actually empower leaders with diagnostic ability. So
Mm.
imagine you're driving in your car, and I don't know cars very well, but I'm very appreciative of those little dials or needles or electronic lights that come on the dashboard of my car that are alerting me to the fact that something that I can't see in the automobile is not functioning correctly. And so the tools that we empower leaders with actually works like that. It begins to give us signs or alerts so that we can diagnose, hey, something's not working well inside of me in my life and my
Mhm.
leadership. I'm not getting the results that I would want. So I'm going to take a better look underneath the hood of my car. These tools also help them understand what's not working, why is that not working, and then it also empowers leaders with the skills to make the necessary changes, which quite frankly most people think is impossible. I am who I
Yeah.
am. I'm an old dog.
Yeah.
I can't learn new tricks. Whatever the excuse is, I tell leaders, I am proof in the pudding that who I am today is the product of years and years of learning how to
Yeah.
self-diagnose, how to make the necessary changes in my attitudes and behaviors that are getting me better results. And that's as a leader in my coaching business, with clients, in my marriage, with my adult children, with my friends, whoever.
Yeah. It's a growth mindset, right? Doesn't it just boil down to, like, wanting that feedback because there's leaders out there that are so set and they don't want to change, so that presents its own set of problems
Yeah.
there as well. You wrote 2 books, Leadership Gravitas and Transform Your Trajectory. In those books, there's tools for leaders and to help them gain, a competitive advantage. Can
Yeah.
you share an example of either a tool or strategy that had sparked some significant transformation in a leader's mindset or approach?
Yeah, so the first book that we wrote, Leadership Gravitas, introduces our two books both introduce core tools in our toolkit. And so the first book introduces what we call the EQ matrix. And what that tool does is it gives leaders an opportunity to identify the moments in their everyday experience where they're getting triggered and where they're defaulting to attitudes and behaviors that are not helpful to solve whatever problem that they're facing. And so here's a simple example. Started working with this company in Los Angeles, kind of a distribution company of, raw commodities like flour and oils and stuff. And they've been very, very successful, but having a lot of internal problems in terms of their executive level leadership, people getting along, communicating well. The company had grown very quickly in a short period of time. So all the typical problems that a business would face. And so what happened was, after working with this group for a few weeks, I introduced this tool and this concept of triggers, and I gave them the exercise. I want you to pay attention each day to the experiences you're having that are triggering you mentally, emotionally, and physically. And then I want you to pay attention to the attitude and behavior that you naturally want to respond with. And then we started talking about that dynamic. Well, a few weeks later, we get into a call and I said, hey, I just want to check in. How is this going for you folks? What are you noticing in your everyday work life? And the president of the company, he says, well, Eric, you'll never believe this. This last week, someone on our team accidentally sent an email out to all of our vendors that revealed our pricing structures, our
Ooh,
margins, and and which was obviously a huge deal, right? Because some of these vendors might be offended or think, why are you making so much money off of this stuff that we should charge you
yeah.
more money, blah blah. And I said, so what happened? He said, well, I can tell you what we normally would have done. we normally would have gotten into a meeting and we would have pointed fingers, projected responsibility, blamed everybody, found a scapegoat, fired that person who sent the email.
Yeah.
It would have just been like blood bath everywhere. And I said, well, okay, if that's the normal way you would have responded, what
Yeah.
happened this time? He said, before I went into that meeting, I knew I was triggered. And I immediately thought, oh my gosh, I know exactly the way I would normally respond in this moment. And so he went into the meeting and said to the team, hey, we've been learning this stuff about identifying when we're triggered and our default responses. Let's all just own that right now. And everybody went
Wow.
around the group and said, I'm triggered, and here's how I would normally want to respond. Okay, what if instead of blaming everybody else for what went wrong,
Yeah.
what if we all chose in this moment to practice personal responsibility? What's my part to play in this? How can I respond in a way that's going to actually be helpful rather than unhelpful?
There we
They
go.
did this and had a radically different experience, right? Because these are problems that come up in business. I tell people, if you're going to lead in any significant level of business, like your job is to solve problems. Like
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
job
That's
is
what
to
I'm
deal with
walking
the
into.
fires. Yes, yes. And our ability to engage the problems effectively is what marks the difference between leaders and great leaders, right? Because we're going to contend with problems and challenges and unforeseen factors and circumstances.
Sure.
That's life, that's business. But our ability to engage those problems effectively, to collaborate with the people around us, to leverage the collective genius, to be able to solve problems without everybody freaking out and reacting in their default mechanisms radically changed the way this organization operates. And still to this day, I still work with them. A year and a half later, they continue to practice this. And now when they see somebody else getting triggered and defaulting to unhelpful attitudes and behaviors, they're able to see it and say, hey, hold on, let's slow down.
Yeah.
Here's what we would want to do normally. What's an alternative path for all of us to take responsibility?
Wow. I love that story. It reminds me of you said the word path. Like we get stuck in these ruts
Yeah,
and we go down the normal reaction that we would always go down. And it's really taking a worn out path and then forging a new path
yes.
in another direction. Let's back up for a minute. And I'd love for you to define EQ because heard it a lot. We've heard it a lot lately, this
Yes, yes.
emotional intelligence, and we need to practice this more and so forth. What does that look like to you, and how would you define it?
Yeah, well, I would define emotional intelligence as our ability under increasing pressure to put the best version of ourselves in the driver's seat. Because life is pressure, leadership is pressure. We're constantly facing challenges. So that's never going to go away, no matter how old we get or how high in any organization we rise. It only gets more intense because there's more at stake.
Sure.
So if we're going to constantly be under pressure, what I tell people is in our best moments when we're not under pressure, most people operate generally pretty well. But it's when we're under pressure that we begin to crack, that we begin to default to unhelpful attitudes and behaviors. And so emotional intelligence is developing the skill set. And I emphasize skill set because some people would say, oh, they're just naturally emotionally intelligent. I've never met a naturally emotionally intelligent human in my life.
Well,
But I
that's
have,
actually good. That gives us hope that we can change
yes.
in where we are to move to where we want to be. So,
Yes.
yeah,
Well, and it's my
absolutely.
story as well. As if these weren't skills that I could have developed at 47 years old, I would still be a very unemotionally intelligent human being, right? And so we can't blame it on our personalities. We can't blame it on our upbringing. We can't blame it on the context that we've spent the last 10 years. And we can't blame it on our bosses or our coworkers or the culture of our organization. And so, really, emotional intelligence is developing the simple skills that allow us under pressure when we're up against between a rock and a hard place to be able to still in those moments operate with composure and clarity and confidence. And I tell people, I don't care who you are or what the pressure is, you can learn these skills and increase your ability to put the best version of you in the driver's seat so that you win and everybody else around you gets to win.
Oh, so what would then some small steps somebody could take to start to have this emotional awareness of, well, emotional intelligence to bring about that awareness in themselves. Suppose they're listening and going, I have no clue what he's talking
Yeah.
about. I have no, I don't even know where to start. It sounds really good. I want to change it. I know things aren't going the right way. What are some small steps?
Oh, it's such a great question. Well, there's lots of great material out there online or in podcasts or in books that we can
That's the
get access
problem.
to.
That's the problem. There's so much.
Yes.
That's the problem. How do you know where to go first? And I
Yep.
wonder if a lot of people, like, just don't know where to go because you have analysis paralysis. There's so much
Yes.
stuff out there.
Yeah. So here's what I would say is first of all, we've worked really hard to create these simple visual tools. And so for us, the EQ matrix is literally 4 quadrants that helps us understand that emotional intelligence always begins in the quadrant of self-awareness. We're under pressure, we're up against a hard place, and what we start doing is blaming the world around us and pointing the fingers and projecting responsibility rather than asking the simple question, hey, if I'm triggered and I'm feeling hijacked right now, that's on me. Like my response and reaction to anything I'm experiencing in life, that's my responsibility. And the moment that somebody recognizes that and is willing to embrace that personal responsibility, it literally changes everything. So when people ask me, like, how do we get unstuck from this continual process of being triggered, hijacked, and what we call having a pinballing experience, where we're just kind of like a pinball being batted around by life's experiences. And I tell them, I said, everything changes the moment you realize that you are the only person that is in control of your attitudes and your behaviors. You cannot blame the world. You cannot blame your spouse, your kids. You cannot blame your boss, your customer, client for your attitudes and behaviors. And we so quickly make the jump to say, I said this because you said or did this. I feel this
Mhm.
because you said or did this. I'm responding this way because of what happened over there, rather than owning that, no, I'm the only one in control. And the moment we wake up to that, it puts us back in the driver's seat. We get to choose. I tell people one of the greatest powers of human beings, no matter who you are, is our ability to choose in any given moment the attitudes and behaviors that we are going to operate with. And so what the tool does is it just gives us a simple visual framework to remember no matter what I'm experiencing, this is the starting point, self-awareness, and then we unpack some simple skills that I referred to earlier that help us practice in those moments. And like anything, the more we practice, the
The
better we
better we
get,
get. Yep.
and the more confident we are under greater pressure to operate this way.
Yeah, it sounds like shedding the victim mentality.
Oh,
When
yes.
when you leave that victim mentality and you go to, you are in control and it's your choice, there's more of an empowerment there as
Yes.
well. Because when you're a victim, it's, you feel like, oh, this thing's happening to you. And you have developed something called the leadership operating system.
Yeah.
And that sounds really cool. I'm familiar with like EOS, which is
Mhm.
entrepreneurial
Yeah.
operating system. So talk a little bit about your leadership operating system because I'm curious to hear about that. And how do you ensure that this system remains adaptable to the diverse needs and challenges faced by leaders across
Ugh,
different industries?
that's
So,
it's a great question.
sure,
I'll kind of unpack a little bit, and then you can dig deeper where you want.
sure.
So the leadership operating system, that idea became something that I stumbled upon through the analogy of smartphones. I became enamored with the innovative genius of people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and others. And what grabbed my attention was simply this, that most of us use these smartphones and we're enamored with them because we can go to the app store and there are millions of different apps that we can download, and those each one of those apps helps us potentially solve a very specific particular problem. But the genius behind these machines is not the apps but the operating system,
Mhm.
which is the kind of governing program or programs within this computing device that really manages all of those apps, the memory, the power usage, which apps can we use, which ones can we not use. There's a lot of different fun ways to play that analogy out. But what I realized, and you said this earlier, is that as a human being, I have been programmed since I came into existence. Through my family experiences, my parents, through my extended family, through friendships, through schooling, through different sporting activities, I have been exposed to a lot of different people and circumstances that have been a part of programming the way that I view myself, the world, and how I engage myself in the world, to put it simply. And so what I realized is I got into an age where I thought, some of my operating system is helpful. Some of it is really unhelpful. That when that part of the operating system runs, it doesn't give me the results that I'm looking for. And so I started thinking, well, then what do I do? And now I did a lot of research and reading. When I say this, I mean not as an academic, but as an armchair enthusiast in the world of neuroplasticity and brain
Mhm,
science, and can we actually change the way we think? Because the way we think is so ingrained inside of us that we're not even aware of those
mhm,
freeways and pathways that have been developed, so that when we have a particular form of stimulus, man, we're off to the races without even thinking about it, because those pathways, many of them are so subconscious. But then when I started learning through brain science that we can change those pathways, we can create new ones and allow those old ones to decay so that they're no longer traveled across. I thought that's amazing. So by developing a set of simple tools that comprise our operating system, all these tools do is think of them like programs. They are simple programs that we as leaders can download into our mindset that allow us to, one, identify those old pathways that are no longer helpful and effective, and two, how to develop the new pathways that will actually get us the kind of results in any area of our life that we're looking for. And the fun part, just to speak to the diversity and how to, what if this operating system doesn't work? Can it work in one
right.
business, not another? Well, here's what we've discovered in working with all kinds of people from all different kinds of backgrounds, with all different kinds of views and all different kinds of industries. We have discovered that because these tools, these operating programs, or this operating system, because it's fundamentally rooted in the way that human beings function, we have yet we have yet to discover a context in which people were not greatly empowered or their operating ability enhanced by this operating system. And obviously, we've worked with thousands of leaders at this point, and every time they say, this is helping me to be a better version of myself, whatever your religious views, whatever your social,
Ah,
political, economic views are, whatever business or industry, whatever level of business you're in, this transcends even into the home life. We have leaders all the time saying, this is changing the way that I do marriage or my partnership or
wow.
the way I engage my kids. It's changing my physical health. It's changing the way I view my future. Because what this operating system essentially does is helps human beings discover the best way to operate, given all of their unique personality and characteristics, to be able to achieve the things that they actually want to achieve.
Oh, wow. So what is one specific component of your operating system that you feel has brought some of the most dramatic results in the people that you've worked with?
Yeah, two. I'll say two. One,
Okay.
just a quick reference to what we've already talked about, which is in the first book, we reveal the EQ matrix, which
Mhm.
radically transforms people's ability to take back their power, right? When we play the victim or the villain mindset, we're giving away power.
Right.
And so to take back the power of, only I can choose the attitudes and behaviors that I'm going to operate with in this particular situation. So it's very, very empowering for the people that are introduced to that tool. The second book, Transform Your Trajectory, introduces the second core tool in our toolkit, which is the Kairos circle, which practically helps people identify any of these given moments, these triggers that we
Mm.
call Kairos moments, which is a fun Greek word that enables people to actually learn from their life experiences. So often we finish, the kind of traditional schooling that we've gone through, and at whatever stage we finish it, and we kind of go, well, I guess my learning season of learning is over. But our
Uh,
ability to be lifelong learners, to practice that growth mindset. If you ask people, do you value a growth mindset? They'll say yes. Do you value being a lifelong learner? They'll say yes. How do you learn? I read books. I listen to podcasts. Okay, that's acquiring information like you did
Mhm.
in traditional schooling. How do you actually synthesize, or what I like to say, how do you actually digest that content so that it actually acts as nutrients to your mind, your body, your soul, your spirit, whatever you want to call your internal world? How do you actually metabolize that content in a way that actually transforms you for the better? oh, I don't know. It just kind of happens, I think. It does.
No.
At some subconscious level, there is some personal transformation that people experience, but that's
Right.
why we read the books and we get this idea, and then we go back into the world and we go, that didn't work very well. And so we give up on that idea, and then we get a new idea, and then we give up on that idea.
Yeah.
And it becomes this vicious cycle of, I've read everything on leadership. I've read everything on whatever, area of your life you're trying to grow and develop in, but I just can't seem to find what works. Dare I say this? Oftentimes, the problem is not with those ideas. The problem is we don't know how to bridge the gap between the idea and the everyday practice that's going to move the needle in
Mhm.
significant ways in our life. And so again, that's what this tool, along with all of our tools, does for people, is it gives them very simple, practical ways to practice the ideas that they've heard, they've learned from all these amazing authors, but aren't quite sure how to metabolize and integrate those ideas into their life for practical change.
So you're giving them the way to bridge the gap then
You got it. You
through
got
your
it.
tools.
Yes.
Oh, that's
Yes.
cool. Yeah,
Yes.
that's cool. I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a minute. So
Please.
somebody's listening and they're going like, yeah, I get you, Eric. I hear you, but I am running a business, I'm running a company, and I am just, I'm putting 60 hours a week in. Holy crap, what you're asking me to do now is journal and be self-reflective and go into all these new
Yeah.
tools, and I'm overwhelmed just listening to you. So let's go back to this theme of small steps. What would you say to that entrepreneur, that business owner that embraces what you're saying? They're like almost giving up before they even get started.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I run into that all the time. And quite frankly, I experience that from time to time where I
Mhm,
into a threshold of my own capacity or character or competence where I think, gosh, I want to achieve something greater. I'm not sure how to get there.
mhm.
And then when someone reminds me, my wife, who's just an amazing coach in my life, will remind me, well, there's probably some work that you're going to have to do on yourself, because whatever the new level is, like, you've got to elevate yourself to that new level. And I think, oh my gosh, I don't want to do more work. So I'm so empathetic. I so appreciate that sentiment. And here's what I tell leaders is a couple of things. Number one, these simple tools and practices, they are simple tools and practices. I never say they're easy,
Mhm.
because change is always difficult. It's always inconvenient, uncomfortable. To move outside of our comfort zone is always going to feel a little bit painful, a little bit, disorientating. However, what I tell people is, if you do that little bit of work each day, the little practices that are revealed in our tools and content, what happens is, over a period of time, what you find is you have established a new depth and robustness of your own personal foundation that's not just going to serve you tomorrow, it's going to serve the rest of your life. And so
Mm.
I have to have that hard conversation with leaders when they say to me, Eric, this whole coaching process, you're asking me to get my executive team on a call every week for an hour or hour and a half on a Zoom call. We can't afford to take an hour or hour and a half away for this. And I say, no problem. If what you're trying to achieve is important enough for you, this is the way I know how to help you get there. But if you
Mm.
don't want to do the work to become the kind of people through whom that future can be fulfilled, that's your choice. But
True.
make no mistake, if you are plateaued, which that's when leaders call us in because they feel plateaued in some area. If you're plateaued today and you're frustrated today, that is only going to compound if you don't do the work. And so there's no substitute for doing the hard work. But then after a few months of working with us, here's what they always say: we can't afford not to take this time and to invest this
Yeah,
energy,
yeah.
because the transformation they begin to experience is so palpable, so tangible, so amazing for them, that they literally realize, okay, this is worth doing. It's no different than somebody says, I need to lose 15 pounds. They go to the gym for, January 1, they go into the gym and they're excited and they lose steam and they stop doing it because they don't have the partnership that they need to stay the course. Because the results we're looking for, if they're significant
Mhm.
results never come overnight. They only
Sure.
happen over a period of time being committed to small disciplines. There's a lot of books out there, and Atomic Habits, and those that would support that idea. And so, in the same way that leaders struggle to change because they don't want to commit to these practices, is the same reason why people don't lose weight or don't increase their exercise ability or don't budget their finances. And I tell people, when the pain of staying there is bigger than the pain of change, then call me back and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, yeah, I was just thinking about it. It's just like learning anything new. If you wanted to learn to play the piano, my kids played the piano, and
Yeah.
in the beginning, you have to labor through it. You're just working on your scales, but at some point, it becomes natural. So, transforming who you are as a person to become a better leader is going to be painful and slow at first until it sinks in. What so it just comes back to being patient and
Yeah.
understanding that things don't change overnight, and I like that you said that the skills are simple,
Hmm.
but just because something's simple doesn't imply that it's easy,
Right.
but just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't at least attempt it and try it.
Mm.
Because simple is something that you can ingest and it's easy to remember because it's
Right.
simple versus
Right.
having something a process that's very complex, because if you can't get that complex process to work, you're going to give up on it a lot faster too.
That's right. That's right.
What role do you believe vulnerability and humility play in effective leadership?
Oof. That's a great question because I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown. I'm sure you're familiar with that
Oh
name.
yeah.
And she talks a lot about the power of vulnerability. I also really appreciate the way that she distinguishes between healthy vulnerability or what she calls transparency. Right? There's the kind of vulnerability where we kind of take our clothes off in front of people, and that can lead to really unhelpful experiences. But
Sure.
then there's the kind of vulnerability that I value very highly, which is, I'll say it this way: I value the kind of vulnerability where we recognize that we can only give to others what we have first cultivated within ourselves.
Mm.
And there's a level of vulnerability in that kind of lifestyle that says, I have to do the hard work in here so that I have something better to give you, because that's recognizing that I have to do the work myself, that I'm not delegating this out. I'm not making everybody else responsible. I'm not asking everybody else to do something that I'm not prepared to do. And I think that requires incredible vulnerability, which is why when I'm working with, whoever the big decision makers are in a company, owner, operator, CEO, have to remind them, if you're not committed to this journey, do not ask anybody else to be committed to this journey.
Mm.
And you being committed to this journey is a level of vulnerability because it means you're going to deal with things in yourself that are not awesome. That you're going to have things about you get exposed. Sometimes even by your team members, that is going to feel humiliating. It's going to lead to this experience of shame and inadequacy. So now let's go vulnerability to humility. um, I like to define humility as our ability to not only see honestly what's going on inside of us, the good and the bad, or what I call the gold and the dirt, but our ability to accept and make peace with that gold and dirt. So some people want to elevate the gold and not talk about the dirt. Other people, weirdly enough, are happy to talk about the dirt, but rarely can own their gold.
Mm.
And so what I encourage leaders to remember is that humility is not thinking less of yourself or thinking of yourself less often. It's not minimizing yourself. It's not diminishing the value of what you bring to any situation, but it is having a very sober and accurate understanding of your best bits and your worst bits.
Mhm.
Because here's what I tell people: practicing this kind of humility actually is what gives people the confidence to overcome imposter syndrome, all manner of insecurity. When we bring to the table what we bring to the table, nothing more, nothing less. Sometimes I have a winning hand, sometimes I'm not. And that's life. But real humility is accepting who I am, for better or worse, today, not who I wish I was, in a year from now, and not holding on to who I was a year ago,
Mhm.
but really embracing and accepting, this is who I am, this is what I have to offer. And some of my hands, if you think of a hand of cards, sometimes I have a winning hand. I have gold to bring to the situation that's really going to help solve a problem. It's going to
Sure.
be the thing that unlocks the challenge we're facing. And sometimes I'm not. But when I don't have a winning hand, that's always an opportunity when I see that dirt to ask the question, is this a growth area for me?
Mm,
So
okay.
that because we get to gold by right digging through the
By
dirt,
digging, yeah.
digging through the dirt. And so I think vulnerability, the choice to do the hard work on ourselves that we want other people to also do, to lead by example, in other words, but also that has to be paired with the practice of humility, because when we start doing the hard work, we are going to come face to face with things inside of ourselves that can lead us down some really unhelpful, nasty pathways. And so humility, practicing this kind of humility, is the way we counteract against that, so that we can stay present in the moment and not operate out of shame, guilt, a
Mm,
sense of self-condemnation, or what our other temptation is, which is to over pump ourselves and
yeah.
to over project our ability in any situation.
2 follow-up questions on that. The first on vulnerability, what would be an example of inappropriate vulnerability versus appropriate vulnerability for somebody who's in a leadership position?
Be maybe sharing with your team or a group that you're with all of your deepest, darkest secrets. And that could come out like, guys, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm not cut out for this job. I don't feel
Mm,
fit for this position. I just feel like a massive failure. And I have to remind leaders, like, think about your kids as your kids kind of enter into their teen years. There is a measure in which we can share some of the struggles that we're facing so that they have a chance to learn from us and with us. But then there's sharing with our kids things that could be really unhelpful. So for example, my wife and I have, we've been married almost 23 years, and we've had our ups and downs like every marriage does, or partnership. And there have been moments where I remember thinking, "Oh my gosh, is this the end of our marriage?" That was really what was going on internally. So if I sit down with my 13-year-old daughter, at that she's 21 now, but at that point 13, and we're having dinner together, and she says, "Dad, how are you doing?" And I say, I'm really struggling. I'm not sure that your mom's in my marriage is gonna work out." That's
mm,
that's honest, but it's inappropriately vulnerable for that particular context. And so I remind people that vulnerability is largely a contextual issue. With my therapist, very appropriate vulnerability.
sure.
With my 13-year-old daughter, probably
Not
inappropriate.
yeah.
It's not going to serve them. Healthy vulnerability is going to your team and saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm really struggling in trying to figure out how to solve this problem. And I'm not quite sure how to wrap my head around it, but I'm glad I'm a part of a team that can help me with this." That's healthy vulnerability. That's recognizing that I'm struggling with something, but you're also doing it in a way that's appropriate for the context and that's helpful for the context.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that you gave that example of unhealthy vulnerability for leaders to say, I don't know what I'm walking into. I'm not qualified. I don't know what I'm doing. Cause sometimes, like that's when you get frustrated. I would think when you get frustrated, you're just like that's the first thought that comes to your
Yes.
mind. I don't
Yes.
know how to solve this thing. And that's the first thing that wants to come out of the mouth.
Yeah.
So it's taking control of your words, pausing, not actually saying what you're thinking and holds that back. So I
Yeah.
appreciated that about vulnerability. The other question was on humility. And you mentioned that, humility is not overvaluing yourself too much. And it's also, it's not healthy when somebody can't see their gold that
Right.
they have. How do you help somebody, number 1, if they're puffing themselves up, recognize that, bring them down off of that
Yes.
high, and then bring it up from the opposite is when you can't see it, and the opposite actually, I probably tend to be on both extremes, so I'm asking the question for me, even if anybody else listening.
Yeah.
There I
Yeah.
am, I'm being vulnerable. I hope that was appropriate vulnerability.
That was appropriate vulnerability. I thought it was a great example. Yeah, and I think we all tend to do this in our own ways, and I think at different times, sometimes we elevate the gold and not deal with the dirt. Sometimes we elevate the dirt and don't deal with the gold. So I think we're all guilty of this at some level, and it's usually when we're face to face with a challenge that we feel, ill-equipped to handle, and we're kind of searching internally for, do I have what it takes to handle this particular situation? So a few things. Number one, Identifying what's our tendency, I think, is really important. I think some people do naturally tend to gravitate toward the gold or the dirt. And so we pick up on those when we talked about paying attention to the indicators on the dashboard of our car. How are other people experiencing us? So getting feedback from the people around us. What do they experience in us? Do they feel like we over embellish the gold or the dirt? Secondly, practicing this, what we call honesty, which is, most people don't have a very accurate, sober view of their gold and dirt. And so one of the
Mhm.
exercises we actually have them do is you're going to draw a line down the middle of a piece of paper. And on one side, you're going to list out all the qualities that represent the gold that you either inherited or have accumulated over the years, all of which, by the way, came by digging through dirt. And then on the other column, you're going to list out what are all those qualities of yourself that represent the dirt that you still have and may bring into the world around you. And then we invite them to take a step further, to ask their partner, their spouse, to ask a trusted coworker, a friend, because usually that list it begins lopsided. Some people
Yeah,
it's more
right.
gold than dirt, or vice versa. So then to get that game tape, that feedback, hey, what do other people see about me? And then we go through the process of simply asking this question: what of what's in either of these lists is difficult for you to receive, to accept
Mm.
about yourself? And then that normally opens up a conversation around whether somebody's really finding it difficult to really trust the strengths that they bring to the table, or to be honest and take responsibility for some of the dirt that is impacting their ability to influence others well. So those would be some simple ways to tackle that.
Yeah, and it's an ongoing process too.
Yes.
I feel like in that process, there has to be grace for ourselves and kindness and how we respond to the dirt that's in our lives. I love the analogy, honestly. I've never heard of gold and dirt before, but I'm a very visual person, so
Me
I'm
too.
enjoying that because you realize and you know what? Here, I'll take it one step further. If when you have dirt and you have gold within the dirt and you can find that gold, at first you take it out of the dirt, and if it's dirty dirt, that gold is going to be dirty and you're not going to see it at first.
That's right.
But when you wash it off, it becomes glistening and it looks like gold. And
Yeah.
the analogy there with the water and washing it off could be the people that are around us to
Yeah.
help us clean off our gold in order for us to see it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned, giving ourselves grace. The third core skill of self-awareness that we teach, it starts with honesty and then the practice of humility, and these all build on each other.
Mhm.
The third one is self-love.
Hmm.
And what we remind leaders, we're not talking about this kind of navel gazing, warm and fuzzy feeling. We're
Yeah.
talking about the practice of how, as we practice honesty and humility, we're going to discover things about ourselves, things that we've done in the past, shortcomings, inadequacies, bad decisions, failures. And so the first order of business is, do we know how to practice self-forgiveness? Which I find that for most leaders, when we get to self love, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this. I don't want to do this. This feels very uncomfortable. And what we remind leaders is, if we're holding ourselves indebted for things that we've done in the past, where we've struggled, failed, stumbled, then we're not giving ourselves permission to move into the future. The
Mm.
same goes for part of self love is forgiving others who have offended us, or who have stepped on our toes, or who have harmed us in any way, shape, or form. Because either of those areas where we're not forgiving others or we're not forgiving ourselves, I find are the two things that most often are holding people back from stepping into a better future for themselves.
Makes sense. Yeah. Wow. There's just so much in there. I've just enjoyed all of it. It's been helpful for me too. We are coming to a close. There are 3 questions I like to
Yes.
ask all my guests. So, one is practical, the second is a Pandora's box, and the third is just the theme of small steps. So, let's go with
Great.
the let's go with the easy one first. Please share a book or resource that's had a significant impact on you that somebody else would also be impacted by, besides the 2 that
Yeah.
you've written.
Yeah. Thank you. Let me think real quick. There's so many. If I had to pick one book off the top of my head, it's a book that is very difficult to find. It's called The Making of a Leader
Mm,
by a gentleman named Dr. Robert Clinton. He goes by Bobby Clinton. He was a professor of mine in grad school. And that book, The Making of a Leader, I think is a go to first read for anybody who wants to take leadership seriously, because I think it provides a grid, a framework to understand that leadership is a process, it's a never ending journey, to understand the different seasons of our life as leaders and how we're developing. It's fantastic. It's a great read.
Okay, perfect. The next question is, what is one question or topic you wish I would have asked about, and how would you have answered the question or expanded on the topic?
That's a great one. I would have loved if you. Now, this is no criticism to you in your
No, it's
question.
okay.
I
I get a
think,
wide range of answers on I get to, "Hey, I don't have a question, all of them were
yeah,
great," to, "Hey, this is a
yeah,
great question," and then we talk for 15 more minutes, so
I
or I
agree. I
just say,
agree.
"Come back on the podcast."
I'm happy to. I would say I love when people ask me about my own journey through these tools, because I think what's really important is for people to understand that all of these tools have been developed out of the overflow of my journey and the journey of a lot of people that have been a part of my life, because I am still doing the work. I mean, I literally just this last year went through what I would call another crisis of marriage, as we're transitioning into our midlife, as our kids are transitioning out of the home, as my wife and I are kind of on where we worked together for probably 20 plus years, and now we're on divergent paths, which everything, so much change, and it created a lot of stress on our marriage. And so when people think, well, Eric is an expert, he has figured all this stuff out, I love to share the real time experiences where I'm having to utilize these tools
Mm.
to practice self-awareness, to identify where I'm not operating well, the experiences in my life that served as those indicators on the dashboard of my car that, hey, Eric, you need to wake up, because the attitudes and behaviors that you're bringing home with you at night are unhelpful. And even the latest book, Transform Your Trajectory, I share a bit of this story. And I just think it's important for people to remember that those of us who are on podcasts and have written books and who are coaching others, we are still on our journey, and we're having to practice these things. And that's what, for me, gives what we do integrity, is that we're giving to other people what works so well for us as well.
Well, 2 things out of that. One is I think you did a great job threading through our interview how you have also grown and how you have used these tools in your life as well. So, I don't think you needed this specific question, but I just throw that out to you because I sensed it as we were talking. The second thing is thanks for sharing, being a little bit vulnerable from a personal perspective, but also bringing out the fact that the tools that you talk about, it can be translated into personal life. It's
Yes,
not just for people who are in leadership. What you have developed is not just for leaders. It is for
correct.
anybody who wants to grow in the organization. And you know what? Honestly, marriage is an organization.
That's right.
So, any organization that you're in that you want to grow, what you've written gives people the tools in order to succeed. So,
And I would just add this little simple caveat that I think if people that are listening resonate with this feeling of, I've read all these books, I've listened to these podcasts, and I'm still not quite sure how to integrate this into my life, the tools that we introduce are not competing with all of those brilliant
mm,
ideas. It's simply an operating system that will help you leverage those ideas far more practically and effectively.
okay, good. Thank you for that clarification. As we close, what is one small step that someone can do today that's going to help them change their tomorrow?
Ooh, that's a great question. I'm going to go back to what I said already, because
That's
I just
fine.
believe in it so much, which is simply this: any challenge, struggle, point of frustration, point of failure, you feel stuck, you're at a threshold, you feel like you've plateaued, whatever, however we describe those places in our life, those areas of our life where we just feel like we don't know how to move forward. What I would encourage people is to remember that only you have the authority and power in your own life to change your life. And so waking up to the fact that you get to take full responsibility for your attitudes and behaviors, and that those attitudes and behaviors have the power to either keep you stuck if you stick with the wrong attitudes and behaviors, or to transform your life regardless of what's happening around you if you adopt more powerful, helpful attitudes and behaviors. Yes.
Eric, how can people find you, reach out to you?
Real simple. They can go to our website, and everything is linked off of our website, which is MPWR, which is just empower without the vowels, MPWRcoaching.com. And there they can get access and find links to our books, to our online courses, to coaching sessions. We offer a free hour coaching call, which I am one of the people who does a lot of them. And so people are surprised when they get on the phone, like, "Oh, it's you," and I'm like, "It's me." Like, we care, and it's not for the purpose of selling our coaching. It's because anything we can do to partner with leaders who often feel very isolated and alone, to help them process whatever they're going through and help connect them to whatever resources that will best serve them. That's the point, and we love to do that for people.
Oh, perfect. Well, thank you. Eric, thank you for the gift of your time. This has been an awesome conversation. I've enjoyed it so
I've had
much.
so much fun.